in the light of the way in which the AEC has failed so often, you then came along and recommended that you get access to Australian Tax Office information, which we made ourselves in the opposition clear all the way through that we are absolutely opposed to, and which the government has always made its position clear that is always in favour of, any list and automatic enrolment. And yet we know how wrong the data from the tax office can be. I think we made it clear. I think Senator Ryan will remember it very well. We made it quite clear in our report that the couple million more tax file numbers than there are.
The proposed amendment does not provide the Commissioner with the authority to release taxpayer information that's historical. It is a prospective amendment which ensures that it's only changes to the tax data that occurs after the legislation comes into effect that is available or authorised for release to the Electoral Commission. Therefore, there's no proposition or authority for the Commissioner and for the Electoral Commission to trawl back into historical records. It's, as I said, it's entirely prospective in nature.
That is what I call a red herring argument. You know as well as I know that every year a taxpayer puts in a return and it will then be prospective and it'll be exactly the same people.
That's
so it's
true,
a meaningless argument. The fact of the matter is that tax records are not accurate. And you are proposing to use material that will come to you to put people onto the roll, and I simply reiterate the argument we have used all along, that you are, in fact, putting the integrity of the roll at risk. And if you can't trust the roll, you can't have a properly acting democracy. Tax information has always been sacrosanct. It is regarded as prohibited information, and it is a very strong penalty that is implied if it is in breach. The roll is the absolute fundamental basis of a working democracy, and having confidence in the integrity of the roll is first and foremost. And this does impinge upon the integrity of the roll. That has always been my argument. It always will be.
I know last time, Mr Pirani, we had a discussion about the evidentiary value of a signature. And one of the reasons put to me, I think, without meaning to put words in your mouth, was that people's signatures change over time, so their evidentiary value does decline over time. You specifically refer to young people in your submission, which I know is a target of those seeking of the automatic enrolment programs. I know that, obviously young people are going to be those who make applications for tax file numbers often, their first part-time job or the like. I suppose what I'm getting at is the evidentiary value of a signature for a person, let's say between the age of 18 and 28, may have some value if, for example, you need to go back and check the validity of an enrolment or an exercise declaration vote. So it concerns me that the only thing you'll be getting is literally an Excel spreadsheet or a database from the tax office, names, addresses, having ticked forms, and you don't even have the capacity to decide to look at those forms and say, were those forms indeed ticked? Did they all indeed say Australia as a place of birth or provide some other citizenship information? We're sort of outsourcing, again, the validity of data you put on the electoral roll, but you are going to be required to trust the behaviour of a third-party agency.
Well, we have had this argument about the value of signatures, and it's not only the question of whether a signature changes over time and whether it then can be used as evidence in any sort of subsequent legal action. But I think it's worthwhile pointing out that, as I've pointed out in the past, that the information that's being provided to a third-party agency is significantly of higher identity standard than what the AEC currently requires as part of an enrolment. In terms of the current process for enrolment, there is no documentation provided. In terms of the current process for enrolment, there is no documentation provided.
So it doesn't concern you at all that these standards, because the tax office is different. I think we'll all accept that tax office is a little bit different to a driver's licence or a Year 12 enrolment form and leaving certificate. Because firstly, there is, quite frankly, a greater incentive for malfeasance or fraud in tax than there is in driver's licences. You don't get a copy of the form. You don't have any control over the staff who are witnessing these documents. You are simply relying on the processes of the ATO for everything to be done correctly according to a memorandum you may sign with them. And if something goes wrong, you have no legal authority to conduct an investigation. And so we could be back here in a number of years' time with a problem in this, and you could simply say, or your successor could simply say, we have no legal capacity to look at this, we had to take the data from the ATO, we checked it as best we could.
There is already a series of checks and balances that go to determining the veracity of the data.
The problem we have with your assurances, Mr Commissioner, is that in the Gray report, I can name you numerous places where Mr Gray says the AEC failed in its duty. We have the example of the AEC failing to scrutinise any trade union returns with regard to your responsibilities under the Act. We have examples of, with regard to the last inquiry we did with the Fair Work Australia, where you gave a report on a report, not having seen the whole report, and then got a bit more of it and gave it another tick. In other words, there is a history in the AEC, I'm afraid, and indeed with regard to the Fair Work Australia, the fact that the Electoral Commission was on notice that it should have been doing something with regard to Mr Thompson and didn't. So at every point there are a large number of failures of the Australian Electoral Commission, and yet you're saying to answers to Senator Scott, Ryan, that, oh, believe me, you know, we've got all this in place, it's all going to be terrific. Well, I have no confidence that that's going to happen, because there are so many other areas where you simply do not enforce the Act. Now, we had that report that came from Mr Green originally, that of the people who were added to the roll for the New South Wales election, you contacted those people, only 20% of those people were prepared to fill out a form to go on the federal roll. Now you've got your own automatic enrolment legislation, no doubt you've just shoved them on anyway. But the point is
I
that
reject the notion that we're shoving them on, Mrs Bishop. There is a very detailed forensic process.
Well, I'm afraid I can't accept that the AEC has a forensic process.
I'll provide evidence
because of your history. People are going on who ought not to be on. So everywhere we go, there is no assurances that you can give confidence. I go to the EM, explanatory memorandum for this bill, which again you're responsible for. And I read here the following statement. Only information that has been disclosed to or obtained by the Taxation Commissioner after the commencement of the petition can be disclosed. We've already been through that. Furthermore, the requirement that disclosure be made for the purpose of administering the Electoral Act or Referendum Act also ensures that the disclosure is only be made where it is for those specific purposes, i.e. information cannot be disclosed for unrelated purposes. If I were reading that word as black and white, it would read to me, therefore it can be made for related purposes. I don't know whether it can or cannot. But then I read on and says, the amendments proposed by item 53 do not produce any deleterious effects on the right to privacy. Statement, none. However, to the extent that they do limit that right, they are reasonable, necessary and proportionate to achieving the aim of enabling the Electoral Commission to ensure that people who are eligible to vote are registered in accordance with the Electoral Act. So you make two statements. One, absolutely, it's not deleterious at all. And then you say, however, if it is, it's reasonable. Now, which is it?
Mrs Bishop, I think the issues of privacy have already been dealt with in relation
to... No, I'm asking about that statement. Which is it? Deleterious
yes, I'm trying
or
to
not?
answer the question. I think the issues of privacy have been dealt with if you look at the tax file number application process itself, it would make it clear that this information could be passed to the Australian Electoral Commission. Indeed, the privacy statement on the tax file number application already lists Centrelink, Australian Federal Police, Child Support Agency, Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Immigration and Citizenship, Department of Families, Housing, Community Service and Indigenous Affairs, and the Department of Education, Employment and Workplace Relations as agencies that are already in receipt of information from the Australian Taxation Office. And in this case, it would be limited to information dealing with the identity of the individual, their citizenship, their age and their residential address for purposes of enrolment.
With respect, that's got nothing to do with your contradictory statements. The amendments proposed by item 53 do not produce any deleterious effects on the right to privacy. However, to the extent that they do limit that right, they are reasonable, necessary and proportionate to achieving the aim. Now, which is it? Do they have deleterious effects or do they not?
I think the statement is trying to weigh up the balance of this issue, and what I'm trying to say to you...
They are contrary to each other.
What I'm trying to say to you is that the statements that are contained in the tax file number application is a demonstration of how you balance those requirements. I might also add that in terms of this issue, certainly the research that we have done, as well as research by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, suggests that people expect this sort of data to be exchanged, particularly information about contact details.
Would you just tell me if they're deleterious or not? You've made two statements. No, they're not, and to the extent they are.
There are privacy issues which some would regard as of concern. The alternative view is that this would enable enrolment to be done much easier, and that is also of benefit to the community.
Which of your two statements is correct?
Of benefit to the community.
Which statement is correct? No answer.
I've given you an answer, Mr.
Well, you haven't.